Welcome, everyone. My name is Athena Paquette-Cormier, and I'm president of the League of Women Voters of Torrance area. We serve Torrance, of course, Carson, Lomita, Harbor City, and Gardena. So I want to start by thanking our co-sponsors this morning, which is Torrance City Cable and the City Clerk's Office. Torrance City Cable is doing sound and video of this event and this discussion, and Torrance City Clerk's Office organized the room for us, which is really important. So we initially organized this first meeting for Solana Torrance Project, also known as Butcher Hill Solana Project, in an effort to bring all stakeholders together for an educational presentation and hopefully discussion on the pros and cons of this multifamily residential development here in our city of Torrance. Just so you know, the city attorney guided elected officials to not come because this matter might come before them, so they cannot be present. The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan political organization. We neither oppose or promote any candidate or party. The individual members may have their party preference, but in acting on behalf or in league areas, no mention or bias is pronounced, so all people of all parties and no party gather so we can have a civilized discussion on an actual issue. So you often find crossovers from issue to issue if you look at a person of a certain party preference. So we have two branches of our organization. One is the educational part, and the other is the action part. And the educational part is kind of what we're doing today. We present without bias certain things on issues that are important to our communities. In our action part, we organize actions that will give a voice to those actions, and it's usually based on a study that we've done. So the League has not studied the Solana project. We're learning just as you are today, and that's an important part that may lead to a study. So if you would want to be part of a study with the League, you would become a member and participate and help us with that. One of the issues for the League of Women Voters since its forming in 1962 has been the development of property in Torrance and its land use. For those who were around back then, you might remember Katie Geisert organizing a busload of people going to the county supervisors to object to land at 190th and Prairie being turned into housing. As you probably know, there's no housing at that corner. So, if you can imagine a busload of ladies going up to the county supervisor's office. So, this land actually is now known as Columbia Park. Yes, another supervisor by the name of Hahn was there. So another piece of land was at Prairie and almost Torrance Boulevard, now known as the Hawthorn Park. So the League has a strong interest in land use and a long history with it. We now feel that given the current climate on all levels of government around the lack of housing, affordable housing, homelessness, gentrification, overcrowding, that the public should hear on a level platform what all the stakeholders have to say about the housing issue. The League has not studied this project in depth, but will if it feels it's needed. We, as all citizens, want to hear from all angles and then decide. If more info is needed, we might just do more meetings. So the lack of housing, affordable housing, and cost of housing is an issue all over the state, and in fact in most big cities. Yesterday I was Googling NIMBY and YIMBY and all these things, and a thing came up, and it was all in French, and I thought, wow, that's not here. And it was in Montreal. So the YIMBY group, for example, is all over. So we hope to help you hear info today that will help you to learn about this and make your own decision as to what should be done about not only this project, but housing in general. If you'd like to join our mailing list, all you have to do is text 444-999, enter your email address, and keyword LWVTA, and you'll be automatically added to our list. If you'd like to donate money to future educational events like this, you can do that on our website, which is lwvtorrancearea.org. Since the League does not allow a moderator who is a voting member or stakeholder involved in the issue of the event, we've invited the LWV Program Director Chair, Pamela Thornton, to moderate since she does not live in Torrance. She is, however, a planning expert, land use expert, and environmental specialist. She's also chair of the Harbor Gateway North Neighborhood Council. So I now welcome Pamela Thornton to start our program.
Good morning. I'm glad to see everybody here. We have a full house. That's good. That means everybody's engaged, right? Yes. All right. So again, my name is Pamela Thornton, and I serve as both the program and environmental chair of the League of Women Voters Torrance area. So I want to begin with the ground rules for today's informational session. So all voices will be heard. I want to remind everyone that we are to be courteous to one another, especially during our Q&A session, and that if we don't have that code of honor recognized, then you will be asked to leave the room and be escorted out. As far as safety goes, we're in a climate now where a lot of things are going on, especially in a public arena. So if you see something, say something. If you think that there's imminent danger around, call 911 or talk to someone outside, one of our league members, so we can get the appropriate authorities here to address the situation. So with that being said, I want to introduce our panelists this morning. First, to my left, we have Josie Vanderpas, who is the concerned citizen of the Torrance area, who has been very active with leading the engagement and some of the public comment regarding this project. So I would like to thank you, Josie, for your participation. Next, we have Ms. Desiree Martinez, who is dedicated to the Native American culture, and she is going to be our panel expert today regarding tribal concerns. So I'd like to welcome Ms. Desiree Martinez to our panel. And lastly, we have Dr. Tom Williams, who I refer to as Dr. Tom. He is an environmental and environmental and geologist, right? I call him the mad scientist. So he's an environmental expert that has years of experience. He did his first EIR back in 1973. He has both local and international experience on a various number of projects. And he also serves locally on the LA 32 Neighborhood Council, and he is a life member of the Sierra Club, and also is actively involved in the Citizens Coalition for a Safe Community. So thank you, Dr. Tom, for participating on the panel today. I'm sorry. So Josie didn't give me. She didn't give me her counterpart's name, so I apologize. So what is your name, sir?
My name is Steve Hemingway.
Steve Hemingway. So he is also a concerned citizen with Josie's group. Okay? Okay.
I'm sorry? Yeah, I'm in Torrance.
Okay, so earlier, before you were seated, there were index cards that were being passed around. If, in fact, you would like to pose a question, please ask for one by raising your hand, and it will be picked up by Ms. Emma Simmons, and she will forward it up to the front. So during the time we have Q&A, we will gather those and make sure that they're addressed. If you have a specific question that you want directed to one of the panelists specifically, please state that so we can make sure that that person does address your question. So for the ground rules and how we're going to start out, I'm going to ask a series of questions and direct them to one of the panelists here. And then after that, we will open up the Q&A session. So the goal is to end by 12 noon. And then afterwards, you have time to individually discuss things as you may need to with one of the panelists or someone that you've met here today. And we want to exit the building no later than 12:30, 12:45. Okay? All right, so just a little information on the project. By a show of hands, Who has never heard of this project before? I'm just interested to see who, okay, so everybody pretty much is involved and knows what's going on. Okay, so the project details. So this is a residential property that is going to have a zone change, and the entitlements that are being requested is a zone change from A1 to a planned development, or what's known as a PUD. They're also asking for a conditional use permit, a precise plan, because this is in a hillside overlay area, and a division of the lot. Previously, there was some entitlements that had been requested on this location before that dates back to 1996, when there was a 63 home development that was planned for the subdivision. And then during the final EIR, that actual application was withdrawn. And then in 2003, there was another subdivision lot proposed for 21 homes at that time, and that was actually withdrawn during the initial study. So here we are today with this particular project, and I want to just start out by asking Dr. Tom, if you can give the audience, by definition, what is an environmental impact report, or what is known as an EIR? Kind of explain that.
An EIR, for Environmental Impact Report. It is not the same as an environmental impact statement, which is at a federal level. So the EIR was first formed in 1972-73 by CEQA. Oh, sorry.
That's better.
The EIR was formed as part of CEQA. CEQA, California Environmental Quality Act, signed by Ronald Reagan. Now, it's a process, actually, and you're already into the EIR process. That is, we're in the period between the scoping for the EIR, that is, what its contents are going to be, and the circulation of a prepared draft environmental impact report, which will be circulated for public review and comment. There are some elements of CEQA which relate to categorical exemptions, to negative declarations, no impacts, mitigated negative impacts, or declarations, and that's where they've mitigated all of the adverse impacts to a very low level. The EIR is where it's open to everything. They have selected that they won't talk about population and housing in this one at this time. So there's some strange things that are going on. There's also a matter that they're not going to consider mineral resources. But it was a mine, wasn't it? So there are some things that can be reviewed between now and the circulation of the draft EIR, and you can still submit comments to the city planning department regarding the contents and what you expect to be in the draft EIR. After the review of the draft EIR, comments will be submitted to the city. The city will respond to those comments, and sometimes there's some changes and things like that, and it will come out as the final environmental impact report. The final impact report and the permits for changes of zoning and things like that will then go to the city planning commission and then the city council. Once it's at city council, the final EIR will be certified as complete and adequate, and the project will either be approved or denied. I've been to final certified EIRs where the projects were denied. So it's not over yet, and I always remind people, I only started opposing the then 710 highway construction in the north section in 1992. And this year they announced, the north end will be in hospice care for a few more years.
Thank you, Dr. Tom. Okay, so the next round of questions will be directed at one panelist, and you will have, I'll just give you like 5 minutes to address, so the timing can start, okay? So I'll address this to our concerned citizens that are here to my left. Okay, so there are some local residents that are supporters of new development, new residential development, especially in the South Bay. Is this a development that could possibly address the lack of affordable housing in this community? Could this be an opportunity for young working professionals to have the ability to move into this community when the rental cost per unit with like amenities, location to the beach and restaurants may have otherwise priced out many potential residents?
Can I take that one?
Yes.
Sure.
Okay. My name is Steve Hemingway. By the way, I live on Via Valmonte, right across from what I've always called Half Dome, urban Half Dome. I think it's kind of pretty the way it is. But I've been a commercial real estate appraiser for 30 plus years. I luckily retired from it, but I've seen a lot of issues like this. The developer, in his statement, if you look at Solana Torrance, they're not asking for any density bonus. They're not seeking any low-income housing issues. They're going to get market value. If you look at their website, it has all the people that they think are going to live there in the project. And they also talk about how much taxes they're going to pay. They say they're going to pay $1 million a year in taxes. And if you know Prop 13, that tells you that they think the value is somewhere around $90 million to $100 million. So that kind of rent is way over $2,000 per unit. So there's no addressing of low-income housing on this site.
Thank you for that. We were going to go to Ms. Desiree Martinez. So in looking at the initial study on page 79, there's a reference to tribal cultural resources. So with your expertise, I wanted to know, are you familiar with mitigation measures that would protect a tribal resource? And can you explain maybe what an acceptable mitigation or permitted mitigation would be?
So for those of you that don't know, and I know they talked about what an EIR does, part of the analysis under CEQA includes this new category, which is tribal cultural resources. And this change was made in 2015, and a lot of it had to do with usually when you're looking at items that are held in high esteem as well as sites by the local tribes, they weren't really being given real consideration except under archaeology. And for tribal people, it's not about dead things, it's about the connections we continue to have with the sites that are around a particular area. And so the definitions that were under historical resources, which includes archaeological, prehistoric resources, and historic archaeological resources, it wasn't really cutting it for the tribes. And so there was a large push in order to get this amendment to CEQA. And so a tribal cultural resource can be an archaeological item or site, but it also could be something more. In particular, there are areas in which the tribe continuously uses for ceremony or for gatherings in which we consider being a vital part of who we are and how we continue to practice our traditional culture. And so there is no wording prior to using tribal cultural resources to identify that. There's this term sacred site, which is out there and within CEQA, but there's something different. There's other items which some archaeologists might not consider significant under the law, but is very important to our community, and we want to make sure that we protect that. So if a project was going to have an impact to an area or something in which the tribe considers a tribal cultural resource, the number one mitigation measure is don't do anything. Just leave it alone, redesign your project. You're going to have a great impact on us. And we've had fights in other places within Southern California, particularly thinking about Pavungna, which is our emergent site where we were born, and that's on the campus of Cal State Long Beach. And in 1990, in the early 1990s, they wanted to develop, and we're like, no, this is us. This is where we emerged. This is part of our internal history. And we fought tooth and nail, and luckily they haven't developed that, and we continue to have ceremonies there. So there are places like that that the community will come together to fight. Here in the Torrance area, the closest village is at Malaga Cove, which is about 1.5 miles or so from the project area. But as far as I know, there are no traditional cultural items or spots within the project development area, but it could always pop up. And so a mitigation measure other than redesign and don't go there could also be, let's do some testing, let's see what's actually there, start looking at the geology, and then, of course, last but not least, monitoring, having a tribal representative there while development is happening in order to identify items.
Thank you. So I want to go back to Dr. Tom. So you have 5 minutes, though. Okay, Dr. Tom? Is that all? That's it. Okay, just for this one. Okay, so you talked about what an environmental impact report is and that process. So last year during the scoping meeting that was held in August 2017, there was public comment that was made. Many local residents expressed concerns regarding traffic, noise, air quality, and potential damage to their homes from the vibrations associated with potential development. So in your experience, how does a community effectively get these concerns addressed, specifically with the scale, scope, and location of this project?
Okay, the project. In CEQA and in a EIR, you look at construction, that is demolition, excavations, grading, then the actual construction of the buildings, then the operations of the buildings. And some people will also include the demolition of those buildings sometime in the future. So you look at the life cycle of the entire project. During scoping, you are asked to give comments as to, do you know of any unusual resources that have not been covered in the initial study? Any mitigation that you would propose on some significant impact. Also, most importantly, the alternatives to the project. And I always emphasize in scoping that, hey, if you have a housing project, what would be the impacts of doubling the size of the project or cutting it by half? Those are two very simple alternatives to the proposed project. I also look at, has the initial study identified any financial considerations? If they do mention the word cost, feasible, revenues, taxes, if they're going to claim that they're going to put taxes in, then you ask for an economic analysis of the project. The city of San Jose, where I did my first EIR, they actually had a second environmental, or EIR, economic impact report. So you're in the scoping right now. There's a question as to whether it's closed or not. So anything that you can, I say, form into a statement that we want this. Alternatives, what would be an alternative that would be acceptable to the community for that site, other than do nothing? So there's a lot of things that can be considered. It's been looked at before. It's in an urban context. Infilling right now is a favored subject in the state legislature, and CEQA may be modified during the next year or so as to how you review an infill project. So there's a lot of things that are going on that are affecting us. For me, I look at transit. There are state laws right now that favor transit projects or transit-oriented developments over those of others, especially for infilling. And we're looking at one right now in Chinatown, and they claim CEQA has no jurisdiction for this, 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 and this. And we're trying to fight that out right now as far as transit. So one of my first questions for this particular site, hey, what's the bus line there? Is there a bus line there? Okay, if there isn't a bus line there, hey, propose a bus line as part of the transportation impacts for this project. So there's a lot of things that you can do even now. But the first thing is, think about what your problems are with the site, your questions, and get them out to various organizations that are around here, and we can help. And I say I've done it, I'm doing it right now on about 4 different projects, including one in my home district in Northeast LA. So.
Thank you. So, second part of that. So, we're going to forecast forward, right? So, if in fact this project gets approved with all the opposition to the project from the local residents, is there a legal way for the citizens to stop the project?
Okay, you have to exhaust, first off for CEQA, it's a state law, so therefore a lot of people like to use it to attack the cities, counties, and various agency actions. Any discretionary action requires CEQA. So if somebody says yes or no, rather than ministerial, that is counter permit, they have to go through CEQA. For CEQA and for the environmental impact report, you have to keep pestering the Planning Commission, then the City Council. Once it goes to City Council, they have to vote as to do they certify the final environmental impact report. If they do, and if they approve the project, then at that time you have 30 days to issue a notice of intent to sue. And it's usually because the CEQA document is incomplete and inadequate. So if you're making comments on the draft EIR, just the first thing is, we find this section to be incomplete and inadequate because of . So there are various ways, but I might say there's a lot of CEQA lawyers out there also. So start looking for one now, organize, and in fact, one of my home associations, that is Center for the Citizens Coalition for a Safe Community, formed because of the LA County's oil field development in the Inglewood oil field. And basically they stopped it. We are now in the 9th year of the mitigation, monitoring, and reporting plan. And what does it do? It opens up this entire project to public review on an ongoing basis. So any complaints that come in have to be addressed. And you might say we had our meeting last Thursday night over in Culver City, but it works that way. So you might say it ain't over till it's over.
Thank you, Dr. Tom. I've got to cut you. Thank you for that.
Yep.
So I also wanted to just let the audience know we did, as a league, invite the developer to come to present, or someone to represent the developer's project. So we don't have a developer here, But for those that would be for the project, I want to make sure that it was a balanced discussion. So we don't have anybody here. But there were some statements made that a lot of the people that are considered NIMBYs, not in my backyard, are using these type of projects to prevent large development on this size and scale. But then you have the pro side that may say, or considered to be the YIMBYs that would like the development, to say, well, we need more housing. So we also heard that the housing is not necessarily affordable, but it is allowing an option. So does anybody on the panel want to address it from that perspective?
Well, I want to go back to the Solana Torrance website, and one of their, I think, fairy tales is that if this project had been built, Torrance, Toyota of Torrance wouldn't have moved to Texas. So, I mean, those people wanted the American dream of, I guess, living in an apartment. So, I mean, believe it or not, that's on their website. And So
is there a question here of economic development versus quality of life?
you want to take it? Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you know, do we have to build every inch of land? Do we have to build everything? Do we have to fill in our half dome? And do you all know that when I moved to the area in 1997, at that point it was a wet year. Walking the pit was wonderful. There was a huge wetland pond, trees, brush, birds, owls, all kinds of wildlife back in there. And I used to walk up to the top, what they now call, the developer calls Slope 2. This is, you'll see on the map, all the area that fronts Hawthorne Boulevard. That hill is going to be gone. That's Slope 2. So on top of Slope 2, there was a concrete foundation and also a mine shaft entrance that had been filled in. Well, it turns out the whole area, the PV landfill, Ernie Howlett Park, and especially what we call Butcher Hill, is networked in tunnels. They're everywhere. And the most unstable land is Butcher Hill. That's why they strip mined it. Everything else got tunnels. There was a tunnel access there, and in the 60s, when they were grading the landfill, they actually lost a bulldozer. They were grading, and it just cascaded down through the tunnels. They just went down through the roofs of the tunnels. So there's a lot of problems, and yes, for quality of life, it would be nice to leave it alone. There's been a lot of damage done. In the 20s and 30s, there was no regulation on mining. They said it was a poor boy mine, meaning they didn't even put timber in the tunnels. We know where Country Hills is. That area over there, you remember? They had 29 houses? How many houses? They had to redo a whole foundation. The whole area sunk. There's groundwater contamination, went into the Ralphs. So they're telling us that the PV landfill is totally safe, right? That the containment of the pollution is totally great. But how does all this pollution, how does this benzene get on site? Even their own initial study says that they have 3.6 times the legal or the safe limit on site of benzene. But the PV landfill is safe. Okay, so how is the groundwater migrating? How did it get under the Ralphs? So there's so many problems, and yeah, it'd be nice to have a little environmental space for citizens.
Okay, thank you for that. Desiree, would you like to address that too, from your tribal perspective?
You can. One of the things, particularly with development projects, it's always important to talk to people or tribal members who live in the area. I live in San Gabriel Valley, so I really can't speak to being a citizen or a community member in this area. That's why it makes it very important to go and do tribal consultation, because even though you might talk to one person, somebody else has community ties to a particular area. And so, one of the things that's important that even though there might not be a tribal cultural resource on the actual project site, it can indirectly affect a site that might be next door. So for us, particularly if it's an area where we perform ceremony, the atmosphere, the surroundings, the environment, our ability to touch the ground, the ability to be surrounded by nature and particular animals and plants that are important to the performance of our ceremonies gets impacted. So, when you put in housing, and even though, like I said, there might not something be right under where the housings are going to be, it might affect something else. So we're always going for, as a community, as humanity, we've lost touch with being surrounded by air, water, ground, et cetera. So a lot of our communities are trying to fight to make sure that you're not overdeveloping, because as a human race, we're missing out a lot of what it is to be human if we don't have that connection. And that's kind of where we're going. But like I said, it's really important to reach out to those tribal community members that actually live in your community amongst you, because they will have their own personal space. So he talked about the wetlands and the owls and stuff like that. So there might actually be a community member, I'm pretty sure there isn't, but that lives in Torrance that might have used that spot as a personal gathering for their family and stuff like that. Again, that's one of the reasons why it's very important to talk to the community, the tribal community that's in the area, because there's something smaller and familiar that might be impacted that you wouldn't necessarily know if you just talk to the leadership of the tribe.
Okay. So Dr. Tom, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, it's very simple. My first question is always, what do you want for Torrance? It's supposed to be in the general plan. They're asking for a change in the general plan. The general plan is not an ordinance. And this is one of the things. It might say it can be conditionally changed. However, what you need to do is say, okay, how big do you think Torrance should be in the future? And right now in Los Angeles, the question is, what do you want for central downtown LA? It used to be called 26 towns looking for a city. Do you want a city? Do the people of LA want a city? Does the people of Torrance want a city? Here's one of the locations, general plan. What do you want for your city? And it can reflect recreation, open space, communal spaces, all of these things. Affordability. Wow. I looked at the affordability in the area that I looked at, or I live in, and I don't see how anyone can afford it because of the median household income. And we're actually fighting over a project right now, and I said, give residents of 90032 right of first refusal on any apartment. That's for quotes, seniors and veterans. But I'd say we have a basic issue, but it's more a matter as to what you want for your general plan. Where do you want the commercial areas? Where do you want the mixed use areas? Transit. Do you want transit or not? Do you want real transit or not? There is an organization called the Southern California Association of Governments that if you don't plan it, they are. And that's where I say all of the state money flows through to get projects done. And it's operating right now, and they have a plan for you. I don't know if it's consistent with your general plan or not. Only the city of Torrance would know that. So.
Okay, thank you. And Josie?
Save Our Neighborhood came about as a result of concerned neighbors immediately on my street, which is Newton Street. Everybody knows that's a cut-through street, and twice a day, when parents are taking children to school and picking them up, you just can't get out of your house or your garage. 500 cars coming our way is not desirable. The purpose of Save Our Neighborhood is to grow an active group of citizens dedicated to resisting unbalanced, high-density real property development that fractures neighborhood harmony, increases traffic gridlock, and reduces property values. The group has 3 broad goals: protecting neighborhood habitability, minimizing vehicle impacts, demanding government accountability. We pledge to be active in the laws and ordinances of the City of Torrance, to demand compliance with past governmental directives, such as established zoning and land use plans, the general plan, specific plans, the Hawthorne Blvd specific plans, and the hillside overlay. We further commit to working with any and all like-minded political leaders who share our vision and mission of balanced growth and oppose political leaders who do not. Save Our Neighborhood has their next meeting on March 14th at the PV Library on Silver Spur. I would like to invite you all to come and join our group. We also now have a Facebook page, Save Our Neighborhood, and a website is coming. Another very good Facebook page to watch for information and updates is South Bay Against High-Density Development. Having said that, I'd like to introduce Steve Hemingway, who has been a key person with Save Our Neighborhood. Steve?
How much time do we have?
I want you to save that statement. I'm gonna let you say your statement, and I'm gonna give the other 2 panelists time to save a statement,
Okay.
and we're gonna go to Q&A.
Perfect.
Because we have cards from the audience. So go ahead, Steve. I'll give you 5 minutes. Go ahead.
Oh, you're going to give me 5 minutes? Okay.
Yeah.
I thought you were moving on. All right. I
We're
already
ahead of
told
time.
you who I am, and I just want to say, Save Our Neighborhood, we're the Keep It Simple group. We're not really that high tech, but the power behind this group is women phone calling. Oh my God. You have to go to a meeting as somebody calls you. You can ignore an email, but man, you get a call, you're going to a meeting. We've been packing these meetings out, and a lot of people have been coming. And there's been a lot of groups that have kind of like benefited from us, the spillover, and we're finding talent that are going to other groups to help. So we're not alone. There's a lot of other groups that are, especially say the Riviera Homeowner Association, doing a great job out there. Kudos to Pete, wherever you are. And anyway, I was telling you about how I used to love to walk the pit, and there used to be no trespassing signs, and everybody went over there to hike and bring our dogs, and it was really, really a great place to be. So, interesting story about the tunnel network. We would have had Cal State Dominguez Hills, wouldn't have been. It was going to be Cal State Palos Verdes, and it was like, wow. But then they discovered the tunnels, and they didn't want to build it there. So a lot of, it would have been in Torrance. Torrance would have had Cal State PV at the south end and El Camino at the north end. How great would that have been? But it didn't happen again. So I just want to say, I've studied some of the documents. I'm not an engineering type. I don't really understand a lot of what Dr. Tom does, but I can kind of go with a smell test. And basically, when I look at their documents, let me back up a little. As a commercial real estate appraiser, you guys remember the savings and loan crisis and all that? And all these appraisers were like scumbags. They would make the appraisal at a certain value, and there'd be all this scam. And so there became regulation of appraisers to where they had to follow certain methodologies. Well, in my view, when I look at these studies, whether it's traffic or noise or geologic or whatever, I think there needs to be some regulation for those professionals too, because it seems like if you put money in, you get the results you want. And that's how the appraisal industry kind of used to be. It was kind of a rubber stamp, you get the value high, and for whatever the purpose was, you went down the road. So anyway, it just occurred to me that this project is pretty much a fairy tale. And the fairy tale that it is The Princess and the Frog. So we as the citizens are the princess that are expected to kiss this frog, and I don't think any amount of kissing is going to make this thing a prince. So I just want to quickly give you the top 10 reasons, and I can do it quickly. Well, I told you the number 10 fantasy frog kissing fairy tale is that Toyota wouldn't have left Torrance, okay? And the other fantasy, number 9, is only 722 tenants will live there. We know there's going to be a lot more. Number 8 fantasy frog kissing fairy tale, there'll be plenty of parking on site. Hold on a minute. They got a half-acre rooftop deck, a 5,000 square foot community room. No parking for that. Number 7 fantasy frog kissing fairy tale. No new diatomaceous soils will be disturbed. Hold on a minute. They're removing 300 feet of Hawthorne Blvd frontage, 120,000 cubic feet, over 10,000 dump truck loads. They can't put it on site. They got to take it away, and that's where all the mines, the tunnels were. But yet they're saying no new diatomaceous soils. Check it out, page 35 on the initial study. Number 6 fantasy frog kissing fairy tale. The environmental control systems currently in place at the PV landfill are functioning properly. Okay, where does the groundwater come from? Groundwater contamination come from? Check it out, page 64, initial study. Number 5 fantasy. No worries about benzene. It's 3.6 times the safe limit, page 66. Number 4 fantasy. There's no significant geologic issues. I mean, they admit they're 350 feet within an active PV fault, and of course, Country Hills, have its problems. But page 65 says there's no problem. Number 3, no noise impact. That's amazing. 248 condensing units cycling on and off on the roof, plus a whole half acre of people up there. But there's not going to be any noise. Number 2 fantasy. No loss in surrounding property values. Oh, I'm so glad to know that there's not going to be any loss in my property value. And the number 1 fantasy, frog kissing fairy tale, no traffic impact. Wonderful.
Okay, thank you. So Miss Martinez, we'll just go in order. Miss Martinez, you have some closing remarks?
No, I have looked at the initial study, and I'm quite surprised they actually didn't do an archaeological survey and record search, which is what you're supposed to do, and they didn't consult any of the tribes. So, of course, they say in the ER we will do this, but in order to really look at what's going on, you have to do that initial contact. And like I said, it's one of those, the closest village to here, or to the project area, is at Meliga Cove. But for us, for our community, the villages have a range of not only the exact place where people lived, but within a mile or 2 mile range of that. We went out, collected resources, went within riverbeds, on hills, collected rocks. Actually, Palos Verdes is well known for its chert. And it's actually spread all over on Catalina Island because of the Monterey Formation. It's like the best rock to make stone tools out of. So this area was very important in the prehistory of the Gabrielino Tongva people. So that's something that needs to be talked about as well, is that although there's not something specifically that has been found on the site, there's always that potential because it's within the village use area.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Chong?
Little one. Fantasies. That was a issue. In CEQA, it requires objective, full disclosure, quantified information. Not your fantasy. If you say that you're going to increase the property tax or property values in the surrounding, and thereby the taxes, you have to show it. It can be a projection, a forecast, it can be anticipated future, but you have to show what it is, and you have to show the evidence for it. And all evidence, initial contacts, ongoing contacts, have to be documented and accessible to the public. So I might say as part of scoping right now, it's just to get your head around the subject. But when the draft EIR is circulated, anybody know when it might be?
I think it's delayed.
September, maybe?
Maybe in the
Usually,
August, September,
might say,
maybe.
they'll usually avoid November, December. So it'll either be October or January, February of next year. But then you have to start focusing on, do you have access to all the information for the fantasy? I don't know. Traffic is always an easy one to go after. But I might say there are square footages by dwellings, by all sorts of things, but they have to quantify it. But then they will quantify it in such a way that it's largely unintelligible for the general public. So I might say, get yourselves organized, focus on an issue that you want to deal with, and try to get background. And when you compare the 1970s doing an EIR versus now, wow. The internet provides you with almost anything you want, anytime. You have to figure out whether it's real or not. That's an issue. But might say, how many people do not have an email address? Is there anyone in the audience that does not have an email address? Oh my God. Get those people registered. But I might say this allows you to ask questions of Save Our Neighborhood or anybody. And mine's generally available. So it's a matter as to use the time that you have right now to think of what your questions are. Where do you want this area to go to? And what you can do to help it.
Thank you. So this ends the panel discussion. We're going to move to Q&A. So far I have 6 questions. So far, I have 6. Okay, so the first question, and any person on the panel can address this. As a young professional, I work in the South Bay and would like to live here as well. What's wrong with having these nice apartments here? So does anybody on the panel want to address that?
I'm a property manager. Come talk to me. We have plenty of available properties in Torrance. Check apartments.com. There's a ton of listings. Westside Rentals has a ton of listings. Talk to any real estate agent. There's a ton of pocket listings. There's plenty of housing in Torrance.
So is there something wrong specifically with having those apartments at that site?
Well, you know, from the outset, we have never opposed reasonable development on the site. If the general plan calls for single-family residential, we're all for that. That's fine. That's what is in the neighborhood. That's harmonious in the neighborhood. There's also a little document called the Hawthorn Blvd specific plan, or Hawthorn Blvd corridor, and it kind of envisions a little Walteria extension down to Rolling Hills Road. So they can have maybe a mixed use, you know, the nice developments that have happened down there. There's a brand new apartment or a condo complex, no one opposed. So we can have parking and 2 levels of living space right along Hawthorne Blvd. That's fine. But it says there's no access on Via Valmonte. That is a residential, single-family residential street. That's what we want. We're all for housing development if it goes with what our city... Why did we spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on a strategic plan, on a general plan, on a Hawthorne Blvd corridor plan? Why did we study all this? Why did we agree to all this if we're going to just throw it out the window and build what essentially is Marina del Rey style housing, multi-story, high-rise development? That is not our community.
Thank you. Okay, the next question. Senate Bill 827 will allow for less restrictions, more density, and provide more housing. How will this passage of this legislation affect this project? Go ahead, Dr. Tom.
It really won't.
Mike?
Sorry. It really won't. 827 is being proposed, but has the city of Torrance actually done any ordinances to implement it? I don't know. I don't believe so. So I might say there is a move within the state legislature to, might say, bypass as many elements of CEQA as possible, because CEQA lawsuits are very costly for many. They seldom go to trial, so there's really no case law, and it's usually a settlement. So you might say everything that you do now can be eventually used within, might say, a period after 30 days of certification of the EIR. An important element, though, is what do you want? What would be acceptable at that site? A specific plan, such as the Hawthorne Blvd, is an expression of the community at a certain time of development that is law. So they actually have to either break the law or have the law changed. And that should be a basis of, might say, a credible presentation. Saying, okay, there'll be so many employees for constructing the site ain't the one. It's what you people want on that site that's most important. And if, might say, when was the Hawthorne Blvd specific plan done? I
It
can't.
was 95.
95. Hey, it's over 15 years old. Hey, it could be suitable for review because everybody's changed a little bit. Things, traffic has changed. All sorts of things have changed. So I might say you have the opportunity through this to actually improve it. And why should it be only a change at that particular location? Are there any other vacant lands suitable for infilling, and thereby 827? So I might say you have the opportunity. Make this EIR into what you want, not what the developer wants, and you may find a better project.
Thank you. Next question. How do we find out if there is a tribal community? And this is a stakeholder in Torrance asking the question.
So basically what happens, particularly with AB 52, is that there's actually 6 different tribes of Gabrielino Tongva, and each tribe under AB 52 is supposed to have sent a letter to each agency, city, and county requesting consultation under AB 52. If the tribe hasn't sent that letter to the city or agency, they don't have to contact them. However, there is also consultation with the Native American Heritage Commission, which is the state agency which basically is there to protect the rights of Native American community members in California, to make sure that their concerns are taken into account during all the environmental review process, et cetera. They stand up for a lot of the communities who are fighting situations such as you guys are here. They maintain a list of people who have identified themselves to the Native American Heritage Commission that they are interested in particular projects in a particular area. So the city agency will send a letter, sometimes they'll let the developer send the letter, and they will receive a list of people who are interested, tribes and individuals in that area. So that's how you figure out who would be interested in a particular project. And then you would send them letters, give them all the information regarding the project, and then it's up to them whether they want to participate or not.
So also I wanted to ask you, Desiree, is there a website that maintains this data that a public person could go to?
No.
No?
So
Okay.
there, you have to send a letter to the Native American Heritage Commission. You could do a Google search. Some of the tribes have their own personal websites, but again, you won't get those individuals that are not necessarily the tribal leadership that actually live in the community. So for instance, one of our community members is really interested in the areas around Whittier Narrows, so 605, 60 area, and they've told the Native American Heritage Commission, I grew up in that area. So any projects that are in that area, I want to be contacted about, and they're not a tribal leadership person, they're just a regular community member. So you can do a Google search, but if you really want to get accurate information regarding people who are really interested in a particular area, you have to send a letter to the Native American Heritage Commission. The Native American Heritage Commission, I do not know it off the top of my head, but if you do a Google search, there's actually a form that you fill out, and you have to provide them information about the project area and stuff like that.
Okay, thank you. Next question, how close is Butcher Hill from the PV fault? Does anybody know the answer to that?
Depends on where you are from the fault. Faults are not vertical in many, 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 many cases. They are sloped. And has anyone ever heard of a blind fault? Blind faults are those that have no surface expression. But one of the issues within the draft EIR will eventually be, did the preparers of the document do a search of the Southern California Earthquake Center at Caltech? Because they keep a listing. Anytime there's an earthquake, from, say, those that you can never feel, that might be 10 miles below, to 20 miles below. And recently, say, whenever anybody reports something, I go to Southern California Earthquake Center and do a search. And they have all of the records back to 1932. So, say, the surface expression of the Palo Verde, I think they were saying 300, 400 feet. But that's not where the earthquake will occur. The fault may move. And there are spatial zones that, say, once they prepared the initial ones about almost 20 years ago now, they've done minor modifications because they faced such a large backlash from the real estate department, or authorities and agencies, that it was restricting development. Yes, it was restricting development. It requires that you prepare for it. You don't have to make sure that the building will stand forever, but you do have to provide at least 1 or 2 hours escape time for the residents if they're going to be there, or the public if it's a commercial or institutional development. Schools are different. Major locations for large populations are different. However, it's a matter that if you're on the fault trace, that is the surface expression, that's one thing. But if the earthquake occurs, let's say 500 feet below, you'll never see it on the surface, except that you'll notice that the lamps are going up and down, up and down. And just as a issue, we did one for the Alicio Canyon gas storage field. And when the Northridge fault went off, there were over 500 recordable earthquakes within the area of the gas storage facility of the Southern California Gas Company. So might say it's there. We live in earthquake country. I used to live in Kansas, and occasionally they have earthquakes even in Kansas, but anyway. So earthquakes are easy. It's called the Southern California Earthquake Center. It's online, beautiful system, all the earthquakes you'd ever want to know, but earthquakes are not faults, but they will show you where the surface trace of all the faults are. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, next question is a two-part question. Is there any information on soil investigation analysis based on the Butcher Solana project? Does anybody have information to provide for that? No?
Yeah, there were geotechnical studies done.
On the-
But here's one of the problems. This was an active mine. And one of the series that I expect to see in the EIR, and if it's not there, they have a problem of inadequacy or incompleteness. Have you ever heard of aerial photographs? When was the first aerial photograph done of Torrance? Anyone have an idea? 1923. There are historic aerial photographs of Los Angeles region dating from 1923, then 28, 30-something, 38, 40s, and they are very, very good and used by many agencies to locate old gasoline stations, old oil well derricks, old tanks. So I say, if they don't have a review of all of the historic aerial photographs in the draft EIR or an appendix, it is inadequate. And I say, the city of LA commonly uses them for hazardous waste locations. What was there before the house was built? And in the old days, when they built a derrick, you could easily see the derricks in several of the oil fields. So there are ways of dealing with the soil. Then the soil borings, it's a mine, so God help you. Might say, if you had borings maybe every 10 feet, you might be able to figure out where the bottom of the loose material is. But diatomite, as was said, was mined. So, yeah, there are techniques to find tunnels, even if they are buried. So.
Okay, and the second part of the question is, are there any under 1-bedroom units not in the count of dwellings? So that's specifically for this project. Are there any under 1-bedroom units not in the count of dwellings? I think
My
that's
best
what,
memory is a mixture of 1 and 2 bedroom. I think it was 40% 2 bedroom.
yeah, that's what I read, 1 and 2.
A little issue on that is there's a common practice starting now that they call them lofts or work-live units.
Right.
That is, how many people work at home? A lot of people nowadays. And I say outside contracting is being done, and contractors, like my wife, often work at home. So I say they're starting to change things a little bit, so you got to be a little careful when they talk about lofts or work-live units.
Right. Okay, I hope that answers the person's question that submitted that. Okay, next question. Local grade, middle, and high schools are already at capacity with wait list. Where will the Butcher Hill children attend school? So you know that information.
I called the Torrance Unified School District. I mean, anything west of Hawthorne Boulevard is Riviera Elementary, Richardson Middle School, and South High. So that's where they're going to go. The developer hasn't kind of addressed how many school-age children will be on site. They did say that they're going to pay $700,000 one-time school fees, which of course that's required. They're trying to say that they're being a good citizen, but no, you can only build, you have to pay $3.43 a square foot, which by my calculation, they're about $200,000 short based on the square footage they're proposing to build.
Thank you. Okay, the next 3 questions, or 2 questions, or 3 questions, are all addressed to you, Dr. Tom. So, for the sake of time, I need you to be brief, right? Okay.
I got to turn off my hearing aids.
Okay. Okay, so 5 minutes. Yes.
Want to change it from 5 minutes to 3 minutes?
Yes, per question. Okay? All right, so I'm going to read this, so follow me, okay? In doing research regarding the health hazards involved with the Butcher Hill excavation, there were conditions established as of 2016 that provided safety precautions, including the wearing of masks for workers while on this project. What will be done to safeguard the health of the community against inhaling the toxic silica dust that will be released? In jeopardy homeowners, businesses, Hillside Village, i.e. Sunrise, Senior Living, and the students at Walteria School. This dust is more toxic than, I don't understand any, okay. Respiratory diseases are certain to result. Very concerned.
Okay. Has anyone ever heard of silicosis? Okay. Mesothelioma. It's all an issue as to what you inhale. So the first barrier, unlike some things, and might say I have been in health, safety, and environmental controls on construction sites. The first thing is identify the issue. Silicosis is formed by the inhalation of silica dust, not sand, but silica dust. Anytime you move it, you can put it into the atmosphere. So the state of California, through Caltrans, has recognized that as a problem in the Franciscan Formation. So any construction for Caltrans that goes on in the Franciscan Formation, and might say anytime you have chert or any other silica material, you're always concerned about dust. It's not, quotes, toxic, but silicosis can kill you or injure you severely. It's something like black lung. You don't catch it, but you get it from the dust. So dust control is the first thing. Everything has to be wet. And if it's not wet, you shut it down. Then every operator of any equipment has to have a fine dust mask. And they have to be changed periodically. And you have to have a recording and a, might say, certification of those masks for that particular issue. They have a problem here in that it's a mine. So in some cases, the silica or the diatoms may be in a matrix. And might say it doesn't generate any dust. But as a mine, there's a debris pile somewhere buried under that surface. And when they start dealing with a loose material, and remember that it was wet at one time. Diatoms have a propensity to dissolve the silica. And the silica then becomes a small particle, not, might say, a diatom itself. So that you have a situation that it must be controlled first. Workers must be protected second. And the public has to be aware of what's going on, and the contractor has to be responsible for any emissions that leave the site.
Thank you. Next question. Does the EIR address emergency evacuation through the single entrance exit onto Via Valmonte?
Not that I could see in the initial study or in the appendices documents supporting it. Emergency response, here's a question. It's going to be a large concentration of population. Nowadays, earthquakes. Okay, we don't have tornadoes, thank God. We don't have a whole bunch of other things, but earthquakes. So there must be an earthquake preparedness program. And What happens if the earthquake comes? People cannot reside in their damaged apartments. So what's going to happen to these people? Sorry. And so it's an issue that has to be, I say, responded to. We are in earthquake country. And your fire department will be an issue as to whether they require it. And as a large concentration of residential population, how do you keep them alive for 3 days without any access to the fire department? That can be required. Talk to the fire department. Thank you.
Okay, and then the other part of the question is, has the parcel's agricultural zoning already been changed? Isn't there a higher bar to clear when changing zoning to a type not, is that not formed? Found in the area?
I don't believe it has been changed. I did look at the zoning, but I say applications can be submitted for changing it for the last 20 years. It's a question as to was it ever, I say, certified by the city of Torrance. And a change of zoning from agriculture to anything generally would require a mitigated negative declaration or something else, because you have to deal with the whole project. So if you change it from agriculture to R1 or 15 or 20, you still have to have some sort of CEQA trail. And from what I understand, there ain't none.
Okay, the next two questions are also for you, Dr. Tom. The usable lot size is approximately 50% due to cliff and slopes that are not usable. The density is based on a formula of the number of units per acre. Is that formula going to be based on the total lot size or the usable lot size?
A common practice with real estate development. If you're going to ask for one variance, you ask for everything. So you'll go through the same process and such like that. So I doubt, as a specific plan, they will go for a change from the existing zoning to some form of either mixed-use zoning or residential zoning, but it will be qualified and conditioned by the specific plan which is submitted. Right now, I don't, other than I think it's 3 or 4 lots that they've decided on as to whether they will, as part of the specific plan, have all of the development in 1 lot or 2 lots and leave the other lots. One of the problems with open space designation is that, remember, it can be changed by another city council. So I say I dislike seeing any sort of private open space allocation. That is, if it's agriculture, I say you got one bite at this apple, but have the whole apple. Don't let them quarter it up into little apples. So highly recommend that if they have any formal open space or agricultural designation in what comes out in the draft environmental impact report, require them that they deed the property that's open space to the city of Torrance for recreational development. And that's a mitigation measure. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, this is for Dr. Tom. What would you change about this project that would make it acceptable to you so that it can go forward?
Well, within a moderately feasible financially view, it's difficult. Okay. Because the first thing is, do you have a stable foundation? And the fact that it was a mine, and I've dealt with mines, especially in Malaysia, where the tin mining was just everywhere. And might say mining is, you have shafts versus no shafts, you have rock in place versus you have debris piles. And since they were using diesel, someplace there were diesel tanks and such like that. So assuming that it's a relatively clean location, what is consistent with what you want? It's along a major thoroughfare. And this is ignorance. I do not know your bus patterns down here. And one of the first issues that I would say is compatible with the transit and traffic requirements. And that first goes as to circulation. How do you get in and out of this sucker? So what would I do? Based upon the current infrastructure and what you might suppose over the next 10 to 15 years. Where do you want Torrance, or this part of Torrance, to be at in 10 or 15 years? An example, I had a project on the Sunset Boulevard. And there were a lot of complaints, and they were wanting to rezone it. I said, the existing zoning gives you 3 stories. The current is 1 story. So you're by right, you could increase it by 3. They wanted to go 4. However, what would happen to Sunset Boulevard if all of the current zoning was fully implemented to its maximum? And that's the thing that you think. And remember, in the environmental impact report, it is not what they project the traffic use to be. It's the maximum possible traffic. Don't let them give you what they project to be. Based upon the maximum generation per minute per hour, exiting, entering, that would be your requirement. Thank you. I don't know that I answered the question. What do you want? That's the basic element. What would you accept?
Okay. So the next question, well, the same question, I'll address to the concerned citizen. So what would you change about the project that would make it acceptable to you so that it can go forward?
Well, as I said, I think the Hawthorne Boulevard corridor specific plan was good. I mean, it was under D. Hardison, and it envisioned extending Walteria, make it kind of a live-work environment where there's some shops below and houses or apartments above. There's a development right at the corner of 244th. Remember Marcy's candy shop right across the street? It's a good example. And the other development that just happened was at the old Akai Swim School. There's 9 condos there. No one complained. So if we can extend that all the way down to Sunrise Assisted Living, that'd be fine along the corridor. But behind the corridor, there's a reasonable depth that you can build properties. And it should be pretty much to the alley, behind, let's say, ABC Pools and all that area over there. If that's 100, 125 feet, that's what they should get along Hawthorne Boulevard for commercial or mixed-use purposes. Behind that, it should be single-family residential.
Okay, thank you. Next question. You may have the answer to this too. Do we know why the 60-unit project was withdrawn in 1996? So according to the city's documents, the actual applicant withdrew before the final EIR was prepared.
Well, it was a little before my time, but I heard Jack Maserlian talk about it, and what happened was, I believe Mr. Butcher wanted, I think, 30 single-family homes, which had a loop, and it ended at Pinzon. So even though historically there had been a road from Torrance that led to Pinzon, Hill Street, actually was a road that went across Hawthorne Boulevard, and they went right up there to Pinzon to the top of what we call Butcher Hill. So the fire department didn't have a place to turn around, so Mr. Butcher said, well, that's fine, we'll just open up Pinzon. So, oh, no. PV residents said, no, you cannot open up Pinzon to that development. So, I believe it was Mr. Councilman Applegate led some other people. They actually closed Via Valmonte for a time, and that triggered obviously a big response. And the communities then came together and built 2 left turn lanes. If you're at the corner of PV Drive North and Hawthorn and you're trying to go north, there's 2 left turn lanes right there. Well, that was a result of all this catastrophe in that time during 1996. And so they put some turn measures to try to keep people from PV turning onto Mesa, which of course they all just defeat anyway. But so they did try to work together, and they came up with some solutions that helped with traffic at that point. But yeah, the project was withdrawn.
Okay. So we have a lot of questions that are dealing with the traffic, so I want to kind of address that now since you just spoke about the site itself. Okay, so Hawthorne Rolling Hills Sunrise Complex magically passed the EIR guidelines for this, yet daily close to 50 cars are lined up and down Madison, Candlewood, endangering the normal traffic flow. Perhaps raising awareness to this issue will raise the lack of accuracy in regards to the EIR parking studies for the proposed Butcher Hill development. So does anybody, they want to address that are on the panel specifically?
Traffic. It's very difficult to do right now. You're in scoping. But again, one of the characteristics is that SCAG's, Southern California Association of Government, provides an overall traffic model for all cities within LA County. So you start with that first. However, for a particular project, they will have, quotes, norms as to how many people will come out of a building based upon the floor area, number of units, and such like that. However, that is not usually the maximum case. Now, if you go over to the Torrance refinery and ask them about their emissions, they are regulated by the Southern California Air Quality Management District, not on their operational emissions, but on what are the maximum capable emissions from a stack or event. The AQMD does not care about what they would operate at. They worry about what is the maximum physical capacity. And I say, having seen some of the issues at single point access for a building, and we have the same problem with one of ours in my home district, it's a matter as to, okay, if they're tailbacked in the parking lot, people are going to do weird and wonderful things. Left-hand turns, unless you have a barrier. So part of this traffic circulation, the first part is traffic circulation. How do you get in and out of the building to the street without crossing, I say, traffic lanes? So that's one thing. Question as to the curbs. How are the curbs formed in order to allow a right turn to merge with the traffic flow? There's all sorts of physical things that can be done. But the first premise is they have to do a model. They can do the standard model but they should also do a model based upon the maximum worst-case conditions, both going into and out of the project.
So we have a related question asking specifically what the developer will do to mitigate the traffic on the 2-lane Via Valmonte. The concern is that they don't have a way to evacuate from the hill other than the 2-lane street.
The standard would be traffic light, but it's too close to the existing Hawthorn. It is very difficult to use that 2-lane road, period. So the question is, how can they access onto a Hawthorn? The first issue is, how can you circulate? Then the question becomes, how can the anticipated flow of traffic from the project into the anticipated flow